So hi everyone. Let me start with a full disclaimer. I'm not part of the Mission Atlantic project. Don't tell anyone. No, so Warsha Singh from Marine and Freshwater Research Institute. So this is not really a results-focused presentation, but I would like to take the time to introduce this ICES working group on integrated ecosystem assessment of Icelandic waters. When I got to know about this conference, I reached out to Benjamin and asked him if I could attend, and because I thought the results from this project would be very relevant for the IEA groups, and also it's nice for this forum to know what the IEA groups are doing. Yeah. And as you can see, the sun is always shining in Iceland. I guess most of you have seen this map from ICES, the ecoregions, and most of these ecoregions have an IEA group. Okay, so let's go to the Icelandic waters, and I will just so the focus of the group is to apply IEA to support ecosystem approach to management in Icelandic waters. And, but also to assess the status of the ecosystem, highlighting key signals of change and underlying pressures. So these groups really operate on terms of reference, or the tasks that they're supposed to achieve. So here are ours: synthesize data from ecological, economic, and social dimensions, and develop indicators of change, and build and expand ecosystem models, engage relevant stakeholders, and provide an updated ecosystem overview. So when we wrote this a couple of years ago, it didn't seem like an insurmountable amount of work. But usually these groups operate on these three-year term, and you come up with some terms of reference, and you try to deliver at the end of 3 years. And so let's see the Icelandic waters ecoregion a little bit. It's highly productive. I'm not going to go into details of all these arrows, but in a nutshell, there are warmer conditions in the south and colder conditions in the north. And there's a lot of interaction of water masses, creating this highly productive environment which supports rich biodiversity. And so we have members in the working group from these 4 countries: Greenland, Iceland, obviously, Faroes, and Norway. And as you can see from this plot, these processes are connected, and it doesn't make sense to operate just in isolation. We have 40 members, and approximately, with a decent gender balance. And our expertise range from oceanography, sea ice, to marine biology and ecology of plankton, fish, benthos, seabirds, marine mammals. We have a social scientist and an economist also in the group. Policy and governance through the ministry participation, and just expertise on food web dynamics and statistical and ecosystem modeling, and interdisciplinary research, basically. This working group is just 1 year old. The kickoff meeting was in November last year. And we have people from 11 institutions, encompassing research, academia, industry, and the ministry. And so going a little bit into what sort of data Iceland has. So the Marine and Freshwater Research Institute has this comprehensive monitoring program. We have 2 research vessels, and we've had this long-standing oceanography and plankton survey since the 1960s. And here you can see these standard transects that we cover every year. There's 14 of them with 86 standard stations. And this happens in February, May, and then August again. But in May, we measure plankton. Then there is this comprehensive groundfish survey that happens twice a year, in March and then again in October. And these are standard stations again. The blue is covered in spring and the red in autumn. And as you can see, the autumn one goes a little bit deeper. And they've also been conducted since the 1980s and 1990s. Then we have the Capelin Acoustic Survey. There's nothing standard about this one. We just have to go where the fish are, pretty much, because it's a highly migratory pelagic fish. And oops, oh, I understand why this is happening. Okay. So this we conduct usually in January and then again in September, but in September we go to the East Greenland waters where the fish migrates. Then we have the Icelandic herring survey that we do in March and October. We also cover nephrops and shrimps in April and September respectively. And we participate in the redfish survey every 3 to 5 years. And then also whale sighting survey, and also do some research on seals. So the point being, there's a lot of data to work with. And we also participate in the International Ecosystem Survey for the Norwegian spring spawning herring in May, and for mackerel and blue whiting in July. Okay. So most of this data is used for assessment and advice. And we are still doing the single species assessment and harvest control rule under the ICES framework. And we estimate that 90% of the landings are sustainably managed, just through this single species framework. And during the assessment and monitoring, we do involve the stakeholders. So they closely follow the assessment process. And, but, you know, they're very, so it's usually through this association called Fisheries Iceland, and their mandate is to protect stakeholder interests, but the stakeholders are also very interested in the scientific process. And most of the landings data are collected by the Fisheries Directorate, and Stats Iceland has a lot of data on the economics. As with respect to ecosystem approach, we have the Capelin assessment, which incorporates predation estimates, but we don't really classify it as an ecosystem approach to fisheries management. And then we have gadget models that are used for some stocks, but really in a single species framework. We don't really put in any predation estimates or environmental data. So coming back to IEAs. And so the working group is planning to loosely follow this live-in cycle that most of you have probably already seen. So if we focus on this top 2 bits here, develop indicators of change, which ties with our terms of reference A. So I'm going to just show an example from the oceanography indicators. So here are the 14 transects, and during our last meeting, the group of oceanographers sat together and decided that these stations that are marked in red would be good to study long-term changes in the ecosystem. They didn't see a sense in just averaging everything out, because then you would lose signals. So they identified these stations, and the ones in yellow also have information on nutrients. So at these stations, we've started compiling temperature, salinity, and also they came up with indicators such as freshwater transport, mixed layer depth, and Atlantic water transport, and we will also compile sea ice extent. Okay, and then also we decided maybe it makes sense that we also compile phytoplankton and zooplankton at these stations and see if there is any relationship. Plus, we also have the option to look at species composition for zooplankton. So what are we going to do with all these time series? We've decided to put them into this standard analysis framework, analysis of trends and recent changes. This is a methodology that was developed under the Norwegian Sea Group. And we are good neighbors, so we share. So here's just an example. So now we're looking at this SB5 station, this one right here. And the reasoning for identifying this one was because it is representative of Atlantic water properties south of Iceland and in the Irminga Sea. And so here we see with this kind of analysis, we can put a trend line through to see if things are going up or down. Then we can also save the last 3 years of data and do some kind of projection with the model to see if there is any memory in the time series, so to say. And here we see that the model is not really able to predict the recent changes. And so it's a chaotic system, pretty much. There's high variability. Okay, but there's an interesting thing. It follows really well the subpolar Gyre index, and this is an index that's compiled by the WGINO group, the Norwegian Sea IEA group, and you see that the peaks and troughs are sort of similar. So the conditions here in south of Iceland are really representative of the subpolar Gyre. And in fact, our oceanographer said it could be a more accurate indicator than the subpolar Gyre. His words. And then here's another example of temperature in the north. So this station here, and we've seen that temperature in north of Iceland has been increasing, and which is also representative, in this time series. But then we see a dip here in the latest years, temperature and salinity. So basically, we plan to put all the time series in a standard framework like this, so it's easier to follow. Then coming to the ecological indicators, this is all work in progress. We have a lot of fish data. We give advice for 30 plus fish stocks. And so we have all these indicators from the assessment models, of course, the index from the assessment. But we considered whether we should use the survey data to come up with some kind of index. But also, I think it's more important to look at community indicators and life history strategies and trophic gills and diversity index and species richness. These things we haven't really compiled for the Icelandic waters yet. And we've also started compiling some data on marine mammals, specifically on fin whale length and blubber thickness, and seabirds abundance index. But if we were to consider some kind of spatial aspect, then we could also divide the ecoregion into these subregions to look at any spatial indicators, because we have all these standard stations that are visited every year for the demersal fish, at least. But of course, it's important to identify meaningful indicators. We don't want to just compile 100 indicators that don't really mean anything in the end. So this is all, in the pipes. Coming to socioeconomic indicators, these are data which are already compiled by Stats Iceland. Export of marine products by product category, for example, there's frozen meal, fish meal and oil, fresh, chilled, other, and also price index of marine products. So we really have to think closely what kind of data we want to compile for the working group, which might not just be lifted from somewhere else. Does it make sense to do that? And there is net profit values also from 2019 onwards, so not a very long time series. But social indicators, and this one is always non-trivial. Some indicators which are advocated are community well-being, vulnerability, resilience, or maybe just simply number of jobs. But if number of jobs are going down, but each job is paying more, then is that a really good indicator? And so we know that there's an effort being made to gather employment stats for small communities. So these are data sets we need to tap into. And then with respect to ecosystem models, we have an Atlantis model set up for the ecoregion. It includes the food web with 51 functional groups, some fisheries, oceanography model. It has these spatial boxes. So just to give an idea, I'm not going to go into much details, but we are planning to use this model to do risk assessment for key socioeconomic and ecological species under combined ocean acidification and warming. But also there's a dynamic fisheries model being set up to evaluate MPAs, which sort of ties in with the 30 by 30 initiative. Okay. Then we have an EcoPath with EcoSim model also. And we've done a study to look at impact of capelin decline on the ecosystem. So, and it clearly shows if this key forage fish goes down, then it has impacts for top predators. Plus, we started our risk assessment analysis just a couple of weeks ago. We've done the step 1 linkage framework and crossed all the X's. And but the working group is planning to use this ODAM approach to assess the relationship between sector pressure and ecosystem components. And our next group meeting is next week, actually. And then we continue with this ODAM assessment and do the scoring. And this will feed directly into the ecosystem overview that we're supposed to give for the ecoregion. And but hopefully by the end of this 3-year term, we will be able to present an ecosystem status summary to the stakeholders, and so get a little better picture of how things are changing in this ecoregion. And thank you for listening.
Thanks, Warsha. Who are the stakeholders? What type of engagement do you have? I mean, do you call for conferences like this? Or?
These are mostly people in the industry, so owners of fishing companies, and also small communities that represent, or representative of small communities and municipalities.
And those are invited for kind of workshop type of
They are usually invited just before we release the advice. Yeah. So
to comment on the results.
To comment on the results, and yeah.
And are any of the tools that you presented, I mean, Atlantis, EcoPath, EcoSim,
they're not used for advice.
They are not used for advice, but they are presented the results.
They are, yes. We've had seminars where we've presented results from projects and so on, where stakeholders show up. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Questions? Yeah. Dave first, and then.
Influence of a tipping point. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Iceland is probably under direct influence of a potential tipping point in the subpelagia, which is again potentially expected in the next couple of decades. Right. Are you guys taking the risk of this tipping point into any of your risk assessments?
Not in the ODAM framework. We will not put climate pressures in, but it's mostly because of it will just complicate the assessment, because the climate is seen as an overarching pressure, and the ODAM is very focused on sectors and like human pressures. So, but yes, we will do other kind of analysis, and there have been few papers in Iceland showing the influence of changing temperatures on distribution of fish, for example. And but yeah, it would be interesting at some point to do this analysis, to take the analysis framework a little bit deeper and add pressures like those.
Great, thank you.
Hi, thanks for the presentation, and thanks for presenting an ICES working group. And for those who don't know me, I'm the chair of the science committee at ICES, so it's lovely seeing our work presented. Yeah. I did have a question, however. I was really struck by the oceanographers choosing stations along their standard transects without apparent reference to the purpose of that data for your modelling. Is that a correct diagnosis of what happened?
Yes, we haven't yet gone to that step of whether these would be used for modeling purposes. But so we thought about this as two steps. One step, what sort of stations do we need to study oceanography in the ecoregion? Secondly, then we might want to consider identifying stations which are relevant for fish or zooplankton, or whether these are connected or not. So we are thinking about this in sort of 2 steps.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would tend to think of it as one step, but
Yeah.
okay. That was the point I wanted to make. Is
Yes.
there's often, I've seen this in many case studies, is there's this disjunct between the oceanographers who think we've got a lot of disjoints in IEA, but this is a really critical one, is the oceanographers are quite interested in the oceanographic processes and not in what the oceanographic processes drive. And I think that mindset is an obstacle. But
yes, we have this. We haven't, disregarded this.
Okay, good.
So in the next meeting, we will basically sit together and identify, like we've started plotting the zooplankton abundance, and it's hard to find any it's really has a high variability at one station. So maybe it makes more sense to combine stations for zooplankton, and then, relate that with the oceanography close by and whether, that makes sense. Because, yeah.
Thank you, and I think
Yes.
we move on. We talk later.
Yes.
Sorry, I haven't seen.